expectation charged the air. People thought it was going to come down like lightning. The first solo record by the piano man who, by 1973, had grown into near legend. Who had given shape and lift to the great albums of the age. The Stones, The Who, Jefferson Airplane, Lennon. The musician who was not only the bridge that carried classical music into rock, but who was the break itself between old tradition and counterculture. Fans and fellow players expected a record that would leave a mark so bright that the game would have to gather itself around it. Instead, The Tin Man Was a Dreamer, Nicky Hopkins' first serious solo album, floated in and stunned everyone with half of the tracks barely raising their voice, glowing like fragments of half-remembered childhood dreams. No strut, no pose, just a voice that said, "You can all drop your costumes now." And in the era when rock shouted loud, this album did something radical. It came to cleanse your soul. It took you to a quiet room, poured you a glass of water, and reminded you that you didn't have to twist yourself into someone else to deserve love. Don't need to trade away the truth of who you really are. Of course, by then, Hopkins had absorbed his own lessons, from Lennon in bare, earnest humility during their collaboration on Imagine, from Jagger and Richards, since 1967, in rolling sarcasm, from Brian Jones in atmospheric self-dissolve while working on the Degree of Murder soundtrack. "Playing with so many creative people helped me learn a lot," Nicky told Record Mirror in June 1973, "and all of these people have influenced some of my writing." He'd taken it all in, the whole syllabus of what rock could be. But on this record, he was not trying to be anything but himself, because he had already been everything and came back as Nicky Hopkins. And this loyalty to self, that refusal to outgun or outshine, makes the album radical in a way you can't replicate. Hopkins spent 5 months recording The Tin Man Was a Dreamer, from September 1972 to January 1973, a concentrated stretch, but the music had been ripening in him for a long time. The writing went back 2.5 years to the house he bought in the summer of 1970, 10 rooms with its own studio, Mill Valley, half an hour north of San Francisco, wedged into the slope of a wooded mountain. That was what he called his hermit phase, 7 months of it, after he quit Quicksilver Messenger service and returned from London, where he'd just finished work on the Stones' Sticky Fingers.
And if I'm free, I'll try and add up the amount.
The house had in it the old Californian lesson that Frank Lloyd Wright had taught. It came out of the hill sideways, by low roofs, decks pushed into air, and windows laid in bands to take in filtered light. There was wood and glass, the trees close at the panes, and below it a small path going by. When Nicky bought it, it was still almost new, only 5 years out of the carpenter's hands, and it must have seemed less like a possession than a reprieve. A passerby would not have seen it at once. It had to be found, half hidden by oaks and California green.
'Cause I'm watching after you, whatever it is you may need, be it large or be it small.
His studio was a small annex off the upper porch, separate from the main living rooms, but close enough to the house to be domestic. From there, he could return to the kitchen, to the rooms of ordinary life, carrying music back with him.
I'll try and organize your thoughts and turn rivers into streams.
The Tin Man 1972 sessions were largely done on weekends, a patchwork rhythm shaped by other obligations. Tracking began at Apple Studios in London, and the final mixes were completed at Wally Heider's in California, 2 poles of his musical life. The weekdays he gave to George Harrison's Living in the Material World. And then there were the Stones, who cut in twice. First in late November through mid-December, when Goat's Head Soup recording sessions dragged him off to Jamaica, a dislocation which interrupted everything, Harrison's album, The Tin Man, and Nicky's Equilibrium. Jamaica exhausted him, left him edgy and half ill. And then again in January 1973, when the Stones needed him again in Los Angeles for finishing touches. These sessions bled into his own at Wally Heider, spatially, but not mentally. What's remarkable is that while working on 3 albums at once, Nicky managed to preserve the full integrity of his own work. Harrison's album was mellow to the point of wallpaper-like, and the Goat's Head sessions in Jamaica, by contrast, brought out something up from the pit in Jagger and Richards, a sound from before language, before civilization, pre-coded, pre-human. All of it was later scrubbed from the final mix, but that surge of the unconscious, groans, howls, chants, mutterings, can be found on bootlegs which carry that animal breath. Still, placed between the 2 poles of those albums, the Tin Man emerged entirely unperturbed by either, insulated both from Harrison's Krishna-inspired benignity and from the Stones' descent into the primal. But that was Hopkins's gift, and his purpose, to play from the core of himself and not to imitate the rest of the room. Harrison, as well as Mick Taylor, Bobby Keys, and Jim Price, the old Stones crowd, and Klaus Voormann, among others, are playing on the album. The Japanese pressing misfires by crediting Ringo Starr. Jerry Lynn Williams, a Texan songwriter who would later hand over a few gems to Clapton, Robert Plant, B.B. King, and Stevie Ray Vaughan, is listed as co-writer on 4 tracks: Banana Anna, Dolly, Speed On, and Lawyer's Lament. And you can hear the difference, especially on the first 3. When Williams comes in, Hopkins allows the walls of his private room to swing open, and it feels like a Texas saloon suddenly barging into a cottage in Cornwall. The sound of the boozy collective where once there was only the sound of the tide.
Well, she could really feel it being a banana. She learned to do the banana slide.
But Hopkins wasn't going in blind. He already knew what Williams was, a belter of gang vocal tropes who could make a chorus sound like a bar brawl. Only a year earlier, he had worked with him on Williams' own debut solo album, on a CBS imprint, where Williams didn't share songwriting credit for a huge piano part that did half of the heavy lifting.
You know my things are funny. We don't need no money. Please take me down for the ride.
Williams, too, had the same protectors as Hopkins, CBS's Clive Davis and David Briggs, the latter doubling as co-producer of The Tin Man. Williams' style was bark and shove, but it was sincere. He lived the way he made music, having first torched his relationship with CBS in the early 70s, then with Warner, and ending his life and career in 2005 amidst a public, operatic debacle. A fight with his publishing company and a divorce settlement the judges found was designed to stash song rights away from creditors. Hopkins knew Williams' style, and he wasn't the least bit reluctant about it. The album is very commercial, he told NME in July 1974, matter of fact. He understood that both his idiosyncrasy and those moments when he deliberately let the market in were ways of making the work saleable. And the album certainly would have sold more if not for the untimely twist of corporate fate. Clive Davis, the Columbia executive who had signed Hopkins and backed the record, was jettisoned with startling speed just as the album edged into daylight. The Tin Man Was a Dreamer was released in the U.S. on April 23, 1973, but on May 29th, precisely when the promotion machinery was gathering steam, Davis was fired in a move that felt like palace intrigue. It entered the chart down around 200 to 190, Nicky told journalist Gabriel O'Meara in August 1977 in an interview to Brazilian newspaper Jornal de Música. Then climbed fast, 160, 120, up to number 80. At that point, Clive Davis called a meeting because the record was breaking too fast. It had reached 80 less than 5 weeks after released. Well, Davis pulled a single off the LP called Speed On. It was to be CBS's most heavily promoted single of the entire month across every sales region in the United States. Well then, 3 days after that meeting, I get a phone call telling me Clive Davis is no longer president of CBS. And so the record got lost in the scandal that followed Davis's removal. Davis, for his part, had serious designs for Hopkins. When Columbia signed him, the intention wasn't modest. If Columbia is happy with his work, he's under contract for 5 years to make 8 albums, reported the Columbia Record, a South Carolina newspaper with no connection to the label, though the coincidence read like a pun at the expense of fate. The piece, filed in September 1972 by John Clemens, laid it out. In the course of the contract, he can collect as much as $1 million. That was how much Davis believed in Hopkins. So much, in fact, that Columbia allowed him to keep one foot in the world he already ruled. He could carry on as a session player, tour with other bands, drift in and out of other labels' rosters as he pleased. Most striking of all, he was granted complete creative control over his CBS output. Even the delivery dates were his to decide. It was, by the standards of any major label contract, an artistic carte blanche. The papers made the contract sound like a fortune, and in telling it had the shine of one. Nicky clarified what the deal was in his 1977 Omira interview. Clive Davis signed me to a pile of money in the middle of a Stones tour in June 1972, and the contract was for 2 LPs, with an option on a third if they wanted it. It was a good deal, a deal meant to show faith in rank, but it was not a king's ransom. Big numbers have a way of standing tall until they are divided. They carry inside it the cost of studios, musicians, production, and all the other expenses a record company would later take back out of the artist's account. The 6-figure advance sounded impressive, but the number would not stand still long enough to be judged. But even the half-promised dream did not live long enough. It ran aground, partly because of Davis's own chaos, partly because Columbia lost its nerve and began pretending they had never known the man or the musician he championed. The names of the album were big, but they certainly weren't a brotherhood, not even close, and few among them gave to Nicky what Nicky gave them, if they gave anything at all. Bobby Keys gave the album his soul, straight and unfiltered. Harrison and Taylor, by contrast, sent in avatars, airbrushed echoes of themselves, carefully managed, dispatched from safe distances. A far cry from what Nicky gave to Exile, or Goat's Head Soup, or Harrison's Material World, where he handed over his whole creative being, laid the foundations, stretched the horizon line, conjured entire climates. To respond to that level of commitment with a ghostly presence was a failure of moral imagination. The difference between playing notes and showing up for someone's soul. The opener, Sundown in Mexico, is a prelude where Hopkins lays the cards on the table. He tells you who he is, where he's from, and what he's made of. Romanticism, straight out of the classical tradition. The melody speaks like a voice, phrases emerging and then breaking off, suspended, before the next line continues the thought. These are almost vocal lines, lucid and economical, and the piece stops short just before the final word. And you immediately know that this, the statement, "I will not give you the whole of me." You may hear the turn of thought, but not its end. The end is private, sealed away in his lifelong dialogue with God, about the illness that wrecked his body, the fate of being always the sideman, the marriage that exhausted him. But more than anything, the romantic piano of Sundown in Mexico declares his awareness of what it means to stand as a man of the classical world. It means knowing that phrasing is the primary carrier of affect. It means knowing that shaping of line, articulation, resolution, or sudden refusal to resolve, is never merely musical, but a stance toward reality. Waiting for the Band, which follows, is English to the point of ache.
The night was black, it was the blackest that I've ever seen. I stopped a stranger and asked which way to go. He slapped me on the back, and then he he said you can't get there from here, no, 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 no.
It is poetry made of the ordinary, heartbreak drawn from the mundane, reaching for something he knows he can't quite reach, a dream perhaps, or a memory. The voices, his and Williams', that carry it are private and unpleading, hovering above the song with grown men's lyricism that somehow still preserves the dreaming child within them. Inside, sorrow, wrapped in wistfulness and never in display.
Tell me where to find a phone, it's like sitting in the studio waiting for the band to come. Sitting in the studio waiting for the band to come. And if the band don't come by early in the morning, I'll have to find a way to have myself some fun. 'Cause if the band don't show by early in the morning, then I'll be over, darling, waiting for the band to come.
Hopkins sings beautifully because he is serious, and because there is no poise, no claim to power.
Pretty soon you'll find me on the floor under the piano waiting for the band to come.
In its composition, the song moves perfectly. Poetic, but never without momentum. Enough of it so that Hopkins could have carried it on 3 times longer. And the fact that he doesn't is astonishing. There is no grand, swelling solo at the end. Only the piano, clear and pure as poured water. Refusal to claim authority.
Sitting waiting for the band to come.
Waiting for the Band is not interested in dazzling, or even in being admired. It simply places something gentle and true into the world, and lets it speak for itself. And the most staggering thing about this song is its absence of ego. Not absence of it in the Syd Barrett way, pre-individuated, abstract. And not in a sense in which Brian Jones steps up with his flute on Ruby Tuesday, which wanders like smoke, without selfhood at all, like memory of season. It's a different kind of egolessness, deeper, starker. It's ego that knows itself and decides to step back because it knows too much about itself. Many English bands have tried to tap into this feeling, tried to catch it and hold it, but none had set it down as plainly or struck so directly at the heart as Hopkins. Here is the sacred essence of the English soul, its most intricate expression for all its seeming simplicity. And the effect is like a cleansing, soul detox. The version of Edward that comes next is something Nicky first wrote in his days with Quicksilver Messenger Service. A piece of this strength never belonged to Quicksilver, though. They didn't have the weight for it. Nicky gave it to them out of generosity, and they put it out under the name Edward, the Mad Shirt Grinder. But Nicky himself would later say that it found its true shape here, on Tin Man. That's how I wrote it in me head, but it's not how it turned out with Quicksilver. It sure turned out right this time. Yes, it's much more compact. It makes much more sense, he told Crawdaddy in September 1973. This is Hopkins in full flight, maybe the best he ever was. A work that carries romantic piano, jazz, and rock, and holds them together with a sweep of force and imagination that no one else even tried. The riff at its center is gorgeously driving, binding all those worlds together into a panoramic vision of music that feels centuries wide. And the heartbreak is that he never chased this line of composing further, never built the future it pointed toward. Bobby Key's saxophone does here what John Cipollina's guitar never did in the Quicksilver version. It lifts the whole thing and sends it soaring. You can feel keys pointing toward Tattoo You, a lot of which, let's remember, was written in the same time capsule as the Tin Man. Harrison drifts in with some tasteful guitar noodling, but the real adventure is Hopkins. He's the one pushing at the theme from every side, testing it from every vantage, turning it over through different prisms, discovering in each refraction a new perspective. His crystalline trills, the conservatoire-grade chops, the sheer nerve of his technique married to expansive compositional imagination. It's the stuff that shakes your soul awake. Dolly, which follows, is a tribute to Hopkins's wife at the time, whose real name was Linda, but who chose the moniker to signal something she wanted people to see in her. Perhaps glamour. Perhaps an attempt to put a feminizing varnish over a character which was far from gentle. But whatever was the reason for Linda becoming Dolly, Hopkins is most certainly not concerned with it when he sings her name in a way which makes it the most intimate, most heartbreakingly ethereal part of the song. Hauntingly beautiful and sincere to the depth that makes your heart stop for just a moment.
Dolly, where Dolly, come see me through. Dolly, I'm so in love with you. Can't you see? There's no one else for me.
It's not Lennon's playful call, "Oh Yoko." It's not Jagger's outward-directed, desperate call, "Angie," both of which Hopkins had played on beautifully. It's something more haunting, more vivid, more real. The way his call, Dolly, curls inward, as if fearful of what would happen if she were to respond with her entire being. And then the song shifts strangely. After that invocation, the music drifts into a mild, pretty trope, a lovely surface, but empty, a cliché burnished smooth, with none of the depth of that first call.
I think so much of you. And if I start to cry, you come down from the sky.
Williams had a hand in writing it, and it shows. The melody's contour is the kind that can be dropped into dozens of mid-tier 1970s pop songs without anyone noticing. Elton John's arranger, Del Newman, added strings to it, slightly kitschy, slightly factory-produced. And so a song that was meant to be intimate ends up being the work of three men. And Hopkins doesn't mind. The reason why the song is forgettable is because it is not his own. It comes from what he thought he owed Linda, a surface obligation, diluted, half-hearted. He could have made this into something larger, sure. The melody could carry a more serious arrangement, a grander setting. But he chose to leave the song small.
Please believe me.
What is most striking is the displacement at its core. To address his wife, Hopkins brings in two other men, as though even the gesture required mediation, as though intimacy had to be translated into a language acceptable for public hearing. He never returned to the song, never sought to deepen or revise it. It remains a kind of resigned sigh, the expression of a man who longs to love, but whose truest needs are humbler and more elemental: nourishment, quiet, and the assurance of care. Linda's famous rages turned the music scene off her, but she fought Nicky in the same breath as she fought for him, squaring up to the Stones to demand they pay him properly, badgering Columbia to give his record the push it deserved. Like most women tethered to great rock men of that era, she was brushed off, laughed at, treated as a nuisance. Anita Pallenberg raged the same way when feeling disempowered, but Anita had her cosmopolitan armor, her art world connections, her pedigree, her own output, to make people take her at least half seriously. Linda didn't have those things, and Nicky, with the gentleness that was both his strength and his curse, pitied her for it. Linda knew that in the world she'd married into, the only real currency was creativity. So she tried, with gusto, to wedge herself into the Tin Man, contributing to lyrics, with the help of Nicky's pal Harry Nilsson, inviting her friend John Hunt to paint Nicky for the cover, telling journalists that her name wasn't credited because another Linda, McCartney, already had the wifely collaborator slot on the scene, and she didn't want to look like an imitator. She even came up with the name for the record. Nicky is a kind of a dreamer. He is very idealistic, she told Al Rudis of the Chicago Sun-Times in June 1973, while Nicky, beside her, shrugged, "I am no lyricist at all. I don't listen to words. I don't know what any Beatles songs are about. I hear the vocal as part of the music." What he meant was, I only hear what matters. What Linda wanted was to be co-significant, and that's dangerous in a world that only rewards brilliance. Her screaming at Nicky was the sound of someone who knew, deep down, that she would never be what he was. That was the sound her shouting made, the sound of someone railing not just at a man, but at the fixed shape of fate. The contrast between Linda and Linda could hardly have been starker, or more unintentionally comic. Even after Nicky's death, Linda's fury did not abate. Where most might have gone inward to reflect and explain, she simply pressed harder. It was grief, sure, but grief directed less at loss than at absence. The absence of the creative life she had yearned for, and that, despite proximity, had never truly been hers. Since then, Linda has been flattened into a cartoon villain by writers unwilling, or perhaps unable, to manage complexity, and who saw only meanness of spirit where there was really frustration. Her screaming became rock and roll lore, but almost no one, apart from Hopkins himself, who never spoke badly of her, stopped to recognize that the noise was also an attempt to convince herself that the relationship still breathed, and to make the outside world take notice of Nicky Hopkins. Part of it could have been the widespread belief of the 1970s that rage and drama are marks of bohemian freedom, bravery, even sophistication. Some people at the time saw Anita Pallenberg rage and thought it chic, missing that it was, in fact, helpless, the aftertaste of post-war Europe. Linda's fury, by contrast, sprang from another soil, not Rome, but New Jersey, without a network to hold her. Hopkins might have fashioned Dolly into an anthem for her, but he chose not to. But despite it all, one thing seems certain. Had Linda stood in that hospital room in 1994, when he was dying in an agony of pain and doctors were failing him, she would have screamed the roof down to bring him help. But before we leave Linda, it is only fair to grant her this. Without her, the recognition and the joy and the sheer relief might not have been so complete when her opposite entered Nicky's life. Vanna Bonta, actress, writer, inventor, was everything Linda was not and everything Nicky was. A figure of her own professional standing, of a public reputation, with a network of allies, an artistic language, intellectual authorship, cultural capital, and above all, her own center of gravity. Her inner child met his with such guileless directness that those who saw them together called them the innocents. The glow that surrounded them was in part the radiance of deliverance, the light that followed after the storm Nicky had survived to reach it. Vanna was a woman who didn't need to own a man to validate herself. They were equally strange, equally singular. Both played the piano, both given to spiritual imaginings, both carried fierce, childlike idealism, refused to treat love as a bargain. The granddaughter of a Florentine knight and author Luigi Ugolini, who found in the poor farmers around him truer gentlemen than any in the city, And a niece of an Italian children's writer, Lydia Ugolini, Bonta was of continental artistic heritage. She had enthralling stories to tell about her childhood, of journeys across Italy and Egypt, and of her time in Thailand while her father was stationed there. He had served with the 11th Airborne Division, one of the first American units to leap into hostile skies, parachuting into fire, men who were called, with a kind of solemn irony, the Angels. Star in My Life, Bonta called Nicky Hopkins in her book of poetry, Shades of the World, published in 1985. I treasure your goodness. And she goes on saying in that book about 1982, the year they met, I pack them in, a million moments into each, and I swear I won't forget. I won't forget. Hopkins was capable of raucous piano statements. Big, bold, dancing, expansive. He sounds like this on Exile, take Rocks Off or Rip This Joint, where he burns the house down, propelling forward the entire structure of these tracks. Speed On, though, is nowhere near that league. Williams half sings, half shouts over a jumble of male and female voices. Harrison tosses in a loopy little solo, and the strange part is that Hopkins doesn't even take one. What you get instead is a track that doesn't just sound dated, but sounds like a parody of some bad early 1970s habits. Faux party vocals, communal yowling, everybody trying to sound like they're having fun. It's an awkward anomaly of the album, a specimen of that early 1970s barroom rock where R&B subtlety got replaced by sanitized bravado. And it's a reminder of how even great musicians like Hopkins could be undermined by label expectations, collaborators who aren't your real friends, or the ambient pollution of the era. It's a rare moment where the Tin Man, for a moment, becomes Tin Ear. Which is why Pig's Boogie hits like a shock to the system by comparison. This is the Hopkins Boogie Woogie masterpiece, the one that shrugs off the fashions, sneers at the fake affectations of the early 1970s, and throws down against illness, against industry expectations, even against time itself. It's just sheer release, virtuosity turned into light, the sound of life refusing to fold. Here is Nicky the Cat, loose, fierce, full throttle, his right hand tossing high notes like sparks, and his left hammering out chords with a kind of authority that makes you grin and think at the same time. And yes, the title comes from one of his cats, Pig, itself named for the gloriously ridiculous Pig of P.G. Wodehouse novels. His interplay with Bobby Keys is a gas, natural, nothing forced. Keys rides the sparkling drive of the track sounding so childishly playful, you never near him this way on any of the Stones records. It's the sound of friends pushing each other along, and the real drag is that the cut ends just as it feels ready to really lift off. Hopkins had already pulled this trick once, back on Sundown in Mexico, and here he does it again, setting you up, then pulling the rug before the jam can sprawl. If you want to hear what Pig's Boogie can really do, though, go to Let It Rock, his 1975 live record with Jerry Garcia. There, it stretches out into a monster, Hopkins chasing it as far as his imagination will carry him. That's the way it ought to be. The Dreamer is another story entirely. It shrugs off all the rock star trappings before it was even cool to do that. Music and lyric both stripped bare, not just of glamour, but of the usual need to convince you the guy singing is fascinating. The track floats in a kind of Fool on the Hill haze, viscous, woozy psychedelia, and opens with half-comic, half-exhausted lines.
Lord, it's awful. Jeez, it's lonely just hanging around.
What makes them strange is that he is not abandoned, and nor is Linda, who sits beside him as co-writer.
In a dreamer, thinking of you, but what can I do?
Dreaming of you, but what can I do, is just one side of him talking. The private, solitary side that lived more in imagination than real-world fulfillment.
But we had a dance, such a dance.
His singing here is tender, lyrical, almost too delicate for 1973. It belongs in 1967. And it confirms the title. He is, quite literally, a dreamer. The song lays bare the paradox of Hopkins, a musician capable of summoning grandeur and brilliance almost effortlessly, yet choosing in this moment, on his first serious solo record, to turn so far inward that he becomes nearly opaque.
When I thought that I'd found something, it seemed to just slip away. I have always been a dreamer, so I'll try again. I just can't let it end.
That lurch, from the barnstorm of Pig's Boogie to the hushed drift of The Dreamer, is what makes the record, and Hopkins himself, compelling. He wasn't afraid of sounding naive if the alternative was sounding false. Lawyer's Lament is one of the real paradoxes on the record. It starts with a piano intro that's flat out gorgeous, clear as Chopin, aching but lucid, and then rolls into a beautifully shaped melody, arches rising and falling with heartbreaking grace.
When you find you can't go on worrying about what you have, call on me, and if I'm free, I'll try and add up the amount. Don't you think I won't be fair? I can see you're on the brink of despair. I'm gonna help you all I can. You've a few more things than the average man. I'll try to itemize all your bills, try to cure all your ills, but please don't ask too much of me.
For once, the arrangement actually does its job, and Mick Taylor drops in some sparse, pedaled guitar that gives it that Tattoo You shimmer everyone swoons over. Hopkins could have blown this up into something massive, but he holds back. Maybe he thought this was the shrewd, commercial move.
There's nothing I won't do if you'll only call me. Come and tell me about your plans, all about your dreams. I'll try and organize your thoughts and turn rivers into streams. And if I go too fast for you, stop me for a while. 'Cause all I want now in return is just to see you smile.
Hopkins' voice here is unmistakably a singer's voice, though one that refuses the stagecraft. It sits close to the speaking register, clear and even. No cultivated inflections, no rasp borrowed from the blues, no tremor lifted from folk song. The phrases flow without ornament, each note carried clearly. But this lightness is not frailty, it's control, even when he lets his sidelong hiss on the S slip through. A trace of a lateral lisp that makes every line sound half smiling, half subverted. He never forces the tone, never opens the throat for effect, yet the sound lands with unexpected directness. It is a voice that makes you feel its plain humanity entire, and the effect, in its candor, is uncanny. Musically, the song is one of Hopkins' loveliest, spare, lyrical, touched with just enough mourning. It could have carried words of Schubertian weight, but instead the lyrics give us a caricature, a lawyer feeding empty lines to a client. The disconnect feels absurd, almost sabotage, but at the same time, this is Hopkins saying, "Don't take me for a confessional troubadour. I will not open up to you." Hopkins' restraint here isn't that American brand of false modesty. It's English to the bone. T.E. Lawrence, Britten, Elgar, even Auden. In a rock world dominated by American-style sincerity, his whole style was oppositional, practically a cultural rebuttal. He knew he could write devastating music, but he had no interest in putting on the serious singer-songwriter persona. So he armored the melody with ridiculous words. And it's a very English joke, the Bertie Wooster/Jeeves move where a grand form gets wasted on a trivial subject. A beautiful melody undermined with absurd text. You can almost see him and Linda giggling over Wodehouse and then deciding to slip the gag into a record. The problem is, what works in private doesn't always translate when you stamp it onto vinyl. Domestic whimsy doesn't equal universal charm, unless handled with extreme craft. Had they gone abstract, images, atmospheres, surreal fragments, the collision with the music might have opened into mystery, maybe even poetry. Instead, they imported their in-joke straight into the song. That was the split running through the Tin Man. Either he could step into the serious songwriter costume, or he could shrug and lampoon the whole thing. He tried to do both, and that's why the record swings between heartbreaking and strange. That's why it's funny, confusing, and oddly ahead of time.
If you don't believe that all this is real, come and take a look in the books and you'll see I cannot speak.
Hopkins nods to Free on Shout It Out, beginning with the same gospel-tinged piano figure that opens Oh I Wept, a phrase that first steps upward as though reaching before sinking back down, a rise and fall contour which yearns, then resolves. Williams' voice deliberately channels Paul Rogers' blues rock growl, and you know none of this is accidental. It's a sly quotation/homage, both to Free and to the tradition where Free have borrowed their vocabulary from in the first place. Hopkins' piano, though, is something else. It's all crystalline clarity, every phrase cut to shape, the timbre rich, the lines muscular but tender. And while the illusion begins in Free's melancholic register, the music quickly expands into Hopkins' own blend. Pop and blues and rock, lifted by the undercurrent of his nuanced gentleness.
And the phases you have been through them all, you live only for the next curtain call. You've been standing in the spotlight so damn long, you're blind and you can't see where you're gone wrong. Clinging to the mirrors of fame, you won't let it go, and it's really a shame now. Troubles all you find around each bend, and I got better things to do, my friend.
The delicate, ornamental tin containers from Nicky's collection, early 20th century packaging that once carried sugar, tea, or spice from India, Ceylon, or the Caribbean to England, appear on the record's back cover. Many of the world's design museums and graphic design study books carry such objects to explain how art touches commerce, how beauty mingles with trade. Nicky kept them only for himself, as part of the atmosphere of his own home which he carried with him. A reminder of how an ordinary object can shelter both memory and meaning. Displayed as part of the album's cover art, these tins glow with the intimacy of the collector's eye, that instinct for the small and the overlooked, a kind of nostalgia not for empire, but for design itself. These are scraps of tenderness, private codes of memory, pressed into the fabric of daily life. Nicky cared about these containers, remnants, kept things, perhaps wanting to know if he himself would be kept after the contents have been taken, after the take, after the session, after the money, after the useful part. And he was no passive aesthete, no minor decorator of other men's visions. His musical contributions were massive, structuring forces. On Exile on Main Street, on Imagine, on The Who by Numbers, he expressed the very essence of the track's emotional center. This was no dream. He composed and carried his work with startling clarity. If he called himself a Tin Man, it was with the irony and delicacy of the English eccentric, that private humor which serves as a shield. Pig, Nicky's ginger cat, the one Nicky swore to reporters had taught himself to play the piano simply by watching his human do it, presides over this still life like a small domestic monarch. His paws look uncannily like our own, soft, intent digits. The fact that he was named after Lord Emsworth's treasured pig in the Woodhouse novels tells us as much about Nicky as any tour anecdote ever could. Of his own cat-like nature and the traits he admired in cats since childhood, gentleness without fear, curiosity, the watchful wildness of a creature who can curl up like a comma and a moment later become an exclamation point. Half-guarded, half wide open, soft, divine, cosmically tuned, with that particular grace of remaining finally unknowable. And seeing Pig rendered here, something like a Cheshire cat beckoning from the threshold, you feel an almost unreasonable willingness to follow him into a private little portal. Because the Woodhouse reference shows, as a sign that the boy in Nicky, the unarmored part, survived. In Rock's customary setup, the cynicism, the commerce, he chose books which didn't cost anyone blood. Not the cool books which advertised transgression or sophistication, but the ones you read because you wanted to be soothed by a certain English absurdity, a world where the catastrophe is social and comic. And it's hard not to see that as its own quiet victory over the era and its ugliness. Survival measured by the rare feat of keeping the gentle core intact. Pig even posed for the album's promotional shots as the mascot for Pig's Boogie, forever one of those Hopkins tracks that can still raise the hairs on your arm, but also as Nicky's sly self-portrait in feline form. The front cover of The Tin Man was a dreamer, with its childlike, drifting surrealism and handmade softness, sets up an expectation that inside we'll find a man who is elusive and whimsical. But then the cover unfolds into its centerfold. We get a leather-jacketed figure planted firmly in the English countryside. A portrait by photographer from the Rolling Stones orbit, Ethan Russell. Angular face, sharp features, lips set, eyes fixed. A man posed not as the Tin Man, but as the Sphinx, unblinking, slightly feral, not inviting questions, not offering answers. No smile, no whimsy. And you know it's a controlled aesthetic counterpunch. He is saying, you want dreamer? I'll give you structure. You want specter? Here is bone. On that centerfold, he is not asking to be loved. Heartthrob image? No, it's a dare. Looking like a hunk is not what he is interested in. He is saying, you thought the Tin Man didn't have a heart? You were wrong. He has one. It's visible, and it's made of iron. And Dissonance tells you that the album is both. It's childlike and technically virtuosic, dreamy and matter-of-fact, English pastoral and American barroom, vulnerable and in your face, just like the man himself. Without the dream, the man becomes just another severe glam skeleton, and without the man, the dream becomes weightless, forgettable. It's because the two coexist that the record has gravity. And it's a very English kind of double exposure, the upper register English split. Sentiment paired with detachment, beauty framed with self-mockery, passion dressed in understatement, genius wrapped in the refusal to self-mythologize, except when it serves as counterstrike. The cover says, I am gentle. The photo inside says, don't underestimate me. It's strategic and psychologically advanced. Hopkins wasn't torn between two selves. He was revealing them in sequence. First, the dream. Then, the man. By the summer of 1973, Nicky was already telling reporters he was knee-deep in his second solo album for Columbia, hoped to have it tied up with ribbon by Christmas. And he did. The record exists, titled Long Journey Home. It has two instrumentals on it, some rockers and some slower things, according to Nicky, had features him and Jerry Williams singing. But Columbia, in its infinite discretion, opted to let it rot on the shelf. They never released it, never spoke of it, never gave it the decency of reverting back to its maker. And because they didn't, there are no liner notes and no catalog number. Thanks to the efforts of the Stones archivist Felix Apley, however, we know this. The sessions happened in July. Mick Taylor played guitar on Feathers. Ronnie Wood strummed through Don't Play With the Gun and Raymond Glendenning. Steve Thompson took the bass line on Feathers, while Ronnie Lane in for Glendenning. Prairie Prince was on drums for all three known instrumentals, and, as a footnote in style, also did the cover. Airbrush Fantasy, which Nicky loved. In 1977, Nicky told Gabriel O'Meara that he delivered the finished LP, cover and tape. From there, CBS had 60 days to release the record. If it wasn't released within that period, the label had to return the tapes to me and I'd be free to shop them to anyone I liked. They neither released it nor gave it back. When O'Meara revealed to stunned Nicky that he was the grandson of Walter O'Meara, one of the serious, high-profile lawyers Nicky took his Columbia contract to for review, Nicky opened up more. CBS, according to him, was holding on to the record illegally and described how he had shown the contract to half a dozen lawyers. Every one of them told me it was a double-edged sword. It could be read one way or the other. And then came the revealing part. It was Walter who told me not to get into a fight with CBS. I went to 5 more lawyers and they all said the same thing. O'Meara then offered some insight of his own as the interview went on. The way I see it, they are sitting on the record waiting for you to cut another one so they can put it out on the back of the success the new one will probably have. That slashes their promotional cost, besides riding the other record's momentum. He was careful to caveat that this wasn't his grandfather's opinion, but Nicky had known record companies long enough to recognize the shape of the thing. Decca had done it to the Rolling Stones in 1971, gathering old songs into the Gimme Shelter compilation and sending it out after the film of the same name had stirred up the headlines. A label would sell Yesterday twice if Today had made people hungry for it. After Nicky died, there was no campaign, no posthumous crusade to get Long Journey Home out of the vault. Not a whimper of negotiation. And that silence, slick, total, speaks about the world we live in where talent, pure, complicated, can be left at the curb. Because to properly restore, release, or even dignify the music he left behind, which he left plenty, composed, arranged, played, lived through, demands someone with two rare qualifications: love and legal standing. Mickey's reason for not taking the Tin Man on the road was always the same: no musicians. In June 1973, speaking to Al Rudis, he was full of optimism, talking up a fall U.S. tour, his own band, Mick Taylor tentatively on board, the whole thing orchestrated by Peter Rudge, that ringmaster of the mid-1970s megatours for The Who and the Stones. But by January 1974, the tone had curdled. To Roger Greenaway of Record and Radio Mirror, Nicky said that he couldn't find musicians who are compatible. "It's very well making records. I can get people to do that, but they are with bands already. Bands they can't leave to join me, much as maybe some of them would like to." By that time, he felt so despondent he was saying he felt sometimes like chucking it all in, and the bitterness towards CBS for not promoting the record was almost tactile. As he was finishing the making of his second album, he knew, or feared, they wouldn't for that one either. The dream had begun to sour, and the label that should have been his launchpad had turned into a void. Nicky didn't exactly chuck it all in, but by the time of the Record and Radio Mirror interview, he was already back in London, retreating after 4 years in California. The trigger was absurdly American: a multiple murder in his neighborhood, committed by a lunatic, arriving almost in sync with the windows of his truck being shot out. His response, flight, pure and animal, would become a reflex, a lifelong tick of survival. The same impulse would send him from San Francisco to Nashville years later, just after the earthquake and just before his death. The Mill Valley house, though, was not staying behind free and finished. It had debt attached to it, written into the title. A mortgage lender called Citizens Savings and Loan already had a 1972 loan secured against it. Then, on April 18, 1974, the Hopkinses put another $18,000 debt on the house, this time to the Bank of California with rents pledged, if rents were ever to materialize. The house and the trees remained Nicky's, but 2 banks were now written into its future. And just like the Nashville move, the 1974 return to England didn't bring rest. A man may cross an ocean and take his trouble with him, and when he arrives, he finds that the trouble has crossed faster and is waiting at the door. The flat he and Linda found, expensive, desirable, leaked. The roof, the plumbing, the future, all questionable. By the time they moved into Crown House in June 1974, that enormous old place at Englefield Green in Egham where Elizabeth Taylor once stayed, Linda had given up all care of Nicky. Noel Tovey, their antique dealer and the owner of the celebrated Lodian Gallery, which counted Jimmy Page, George Harrison, and David Gilmour among its clients, remembered being asked there to dinner and finding cardboard boxes of ordered pizza on a great heirloom table. Nothing in the refrigerator either, apart from ice cream and Nicky's prescribed medicine. It is hard to know when neglect begins, because at first it may look like carelessness, and carelessness may look like freedom, and people are slow to name the thing that is happening before them. A sick man says he can manage, because sick men learn early that other people are comforted by this lie. Perhaps it began in Mill Valley, in the beautiful house which had seemed enchanted. After all, it was there that Nicky developed jaundice and went into the hospital with his kidneys collapsing, soon after Linda came to live with him. Or perhaps the change came later, after the Tin Man failed and disappointment entered the house. But in July 1974, Penny Smith, later made an MBE, a member of the Order of the British Empire, for services to photography, stood Nicky before Crown House and photographed him for the New Musical Express. And what stood before Penny was a painfully thin man, the shadow of the dashing figure from the centerfold of the Tin Man, the flesh gone from his face and frame. And by 1975, when Nicky was on the road with Dolly beside him, he was living on Rice Krispies, a man with Crohn's disease and a body requiring care, regular food, and a little peace. He had none of these. Instead, he had been left in the one condition he could not afford, by a wife who lived from the money his sick body still went out and earned. Still, throughout 1974 he kept searching, scanning for musicians, trying to assemble a road band, and sketched the first outlines of a new record. The search would take him to a new lineup and a new label. It was movement again, but not yet direction.